Every major spiritual tradition eventually collides with a single tension: how to resolve the boundaries of the individual self against the scale of ultimate reality. The widely recognized Buddhist framework of anatta approaches this by revealing the self as an illusion, aiming to extinguish ego and craving. The Christian mystical tradition, particularly as charted by St. John of the Cross, takes a distinctly different path. Instead of dissolving the self into formless energy, the Christian framework pursues theosis, or deification. Like the iron in the fire, the human soul shares in divine energy, adopting the properties of the divine without ever ceasing to be distinctly human. Modern academic and psychological circles routinely miscategorize John of the Cross's dark night of the soul. They often reduce it to a period of clinical depression or evaluate it as a brutal, ascetic dismantling of the self. The source texts reveal a precise, active intervention. The dark night is a divinely imposed semiotic recalibration. It is a calculated process designed to upgrade and perfect human faculties, rather than annihilate them. To see how this architecture functions, we need to layer three distinct frameworks. We will establish John of the Cross's theology, anchor it in the historical prototype of Christ's Paschal journey, and translate the mechanics using Webb Keane's cognitive anthropology of the self. In this tradition, true spiritual evolution requires no escape from humanity. It is an upgrade to the underlying architecture of human cognition, expanding its capacity to process the divine. St. John of the Cross outlines a rigorous path to union with God. At the center of his theology is the dark night, a phase characterized by profound aridity and the seeming absence of God. The driving force of this phase is what we term divine imposition. The purification is an external, sovereign act initiated and sustained by God. It is a deliberate, targeted intervention, not a self-generated test of human endurance. John describes the intended outcome of this intervention as the house at rest. The human faculties of intellect, memory, and will are quieted. Their usual disordered operations cease, so they can be accurately recalibrated. This table compares spiritual paradigms. Isolating the faculties row, Buddhist ego extinction aims for dissolution, while Christian mysticism seeks to perfect them. Moving to the ultimate goal, not emptiness, but total possession by God, where a distinct self operates through divine will. John of the Cross provides the exact theological vocabulary for this process, but theology alone describes the output, not the mechanism. To see the physical mechanics of this transformation, we have to look at the historical ontological blueprint it was modeled on. John's mystical framework maps precisely onto the historical events of Christ's Paschal Mystery. The sequence of Gethsemane, the cross, and the resurrection provides the exact ontological and semiotic blueprint for the transformation John describes. The Garden of Gethsemane operates as the supreme prototype of divine imposition. Here, Christ experiences a divinely ordained descent into suffering. His prayer, "Not my will, but yours be done," is the ultimate yielding of human agency. This trajectory culminates on the cross. Christ's cry of dereliction, my God, why have you forsaken me?" defines the absolute limit of desolation. It is the total detachment from all sensible, created comfort. This physical and spiritual vulnerability embodies John's house at rest. Christ's human faculties are emptied of self-concern and calibrated entirely to the Father's purpose. The required output of this desolation is the resurrection, which John of the Cross terms the divine light breaking through the dark night. The resurrection functions as the material manifestation of deification. Because Christ's body is glorified rather than discarded, the event demonstrates a framework where the human person in its physical entirety is taken up into the divine rather than being dissolved. This trajectory suggests that Christian salvation is a holistic, material transformation. To see how this theological blueprint reshapes human identity, we turn to the mechanics of Webb Keane's anthropology. Cultural anthropologist Webb Keane provides the analytical framework necessary to translate abstract mystical terminology into rigorous, observable mechanics. Keane introduces the concept of semiotic ideology. This term describes the underlying assumptions we hold about what signs are, how they function, and how we interpret reality through them. This diagram maps the intersection of theories. The Dark Night deconstructs our framework for reading God's signs. Keane calls this semiotic slippage, a failure of representational practices. Christ's cry on the cross illustrates the vulnerability of relying on conventional signs for divine presence. This slippage forces the soul to look past its own internal representations. When conventional signs fail, the experience of suffering is re-signed, moving from a signal of abandonment to a direct, non-discursive participation in redemptive love. Shifting focus down the matrix to ethical affordances, we isolate the mechanical link to the reorientation of the human will. The Dark Night operates as a divine affordance. It is an external provision as grace that unlocks a supernatural ethical stance, the capacity for pure surrender, which is biologically and psychologically impossible to achieve through innate human striving alone. Through Keane's lens, the Dark Night is not an absence of psychological meaning. It's a deliberate, structural rewiring of how human intellect processes ultimate reality. When we synthesize St. John's theology, validate it against the Christological prototype, and map its mechanics using cognitive anthropology, we isolate a countercultural claim about human identity. Webb Keane heavily critiques the modern Western concept of the self. Our cultural baseline assumes that a healthy identity must be entirely autonomous and self-possessed. The mystical priority directly opposes this Western obsession with self-mastery. Instead of building an independent fortress of self-knowledge, the structural goal is to yield entirely to divine possession. Returning to the blazing iron, we see that the human essence is not destroyed by the furnace, it is perfected. It maintains its structural integrity while radiating an entirely new source of energy. This creates the paradox of the reoriented self. True freedom and true agency are only achieved at the exact moment the human person becomes entirely possessed by a divine other. This requires a total inversion of how we construct meaning. It forces a transition from a self-referential semiotic system, where we define our own value, to a divinely referential one, where our identity is authored externally. The Dark Night is the required furnace for this process. It burns away the modern illusion of autonomy, leaving behind a perfectly reconstituted, fully deified human being.